Thursday, February 10th, 2011. Dinner and Learn, God of Our Understanding, Part 11.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Judaism and Recovery. Tonight, we're reading from God of Our Understanding, Jewish Spirituality and Recovery from Addiction by Rabbi Shais Taub. We are reading from chapter 8, which is called Goodness. At the end of chapter 6, we identified that God is not just a concept, a vague concept in AA in the 12 steps, but it has some specific qualities to it. We said he is a power. We said he can affect our lives. We said he's caring, and we said he has a will. The last chapter, chapter 7, we talked about the power of God, how in order for us to let go and let God, we have to know that the person who is going to take care of us from this point on has the power to do so. So therefore, we have a higher power. We are relating to a God who is an almighty God. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the fact that God is not only powerful, but he is also good. And this is going to come from the third step, made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. Okay. God's care. We have established that the God spoken of in the steps is first and foremost a God of power. But power does not necessarily convey beneficence. There's a lot of hard words today, I promise you. This is just... Beneficence. God may be strong, but is he good? In the third step, where we find the first use of the actual word God, because the first time it's power greater than ourselves, which is why we established that the first quality of a God is that it needs to be powerful, because that's the first time it's mentioned in the steps. It's mentioned as a power. But the first time the actual word God is mentioned, in step 3, we also find the answer to this question. God is not just the epitome. Oh, that's how you spell epitome. God is not just the epitome of power. He is the essence of goodness as well. Not only God is good, he is the essence of goodness, which we'll discuss more as we continue. The third step enjoins us to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. The word care is significant. Step 3 is a surrender step. In recovery parlance, what is called turning it over or letting it go, letting go and letting God. In theory, one could just as well be enjoined to surrender to the power of God or to the authority of God. Were God only all-powerful and not also good, that would still provide amply sufficient cause to submit to him. Because he is powerful. And when someone is powerful and has the capacity to do things for us that we can't do for ourselves, or he can do something for us opposite of what we want to do for ourselves, then we have to surrender to such a power. Talk about power struggles. We've seen today, when someone holds on to power and then the people that he has power over are right now powerless. Yet, the third step adds a vital dimension to the recovering addict's concept of God. We turn it over to God not just because he is stronger than we are, not because he's the big guy on the court, but also because he will take better care of us than we can. Not as good, better. Why? Because God is not only good, he's the essence of good. When we take good care of ourselves, we have human limitations of how good we can be, even when we take care of ourselves, even when we take care of others. But when we talk about the essence of God, which is the essence of goodness, then there is no better goodness in the world than the goodness of God. The perfect goodness. And we'll see also later the infinite goodness. Jewish tradition discusses the idea that, at least in theory, God could have chosen to relate to us only as a power. In reality, however, he chooses to relate to his creation from a position of kindness as well. The Medrash says, this is a little complicated, so I'm going to read through it and then I'm going to kind of try to summarize it in words that make sense to us. At first, God has thought to create the world solely with the attribute of stern judgment. He foresaw, however, that the world could not endure that way, and thus coupled with it the attribute of compassion and mercy. In other words, if God has created a world in which He were present only as a higher power, but not as a source of caring, that world would not be able to last. Judaism sees a world in which God is all powerful, but not kind, as an impossibility. Nothing more than a hypothetical construct that cannot actually exist. This is very powerful words, which means like this. Let's take the relationship of a parent with a child, and let's call power, we'll call discipline. Harsh judgment we'll call discipline. And caring we'll call love. And when a parent tries to bring about in this world young children to become productive human beings, ones that will continue to contribute to the goodness of humanity, discipline alone cannot do it. There has to be love. Discipline exists only when there is love. When there is no love, it's not discipline. It's harshness. It's cruelty. When people grow up in an environment of cruelty, they do not develop properly. The only way that discipline is discipline is when there is love. Everyone understands that concept, right? Which is why, for example, professionals in the field of intervention, and there's some very famous interventionists, they wrote a book together called Love First. That's the name of the book of intervention. Because they came up to the conclusion that unless a person is certain that you love them truly, then there's nothing that you can do for them to accept your discipline. A child accepts the discipline of the father, the guidance of the father, because he knows that the father loves him unconditionally. If he has a doubt about it, then he just rebels. More discipline means more ways of finding a way to get away with doing exactly the opposite of what my father wants. The way that I want to do what my father wants, and when he disciplines me, it actually has an impact on me, is when I have no doubt about the love that my father has for me. And in a way, this is like this in the world because that's how God created the world. When God created the world, there's different attributes of God, the attribute of discipline and the attribute of love. God first created the world with the attribute of love itself. That world collapsed. God then created the world with the attribute of discipline alone, and that collapsed. And then, the only way the world that we have today is a world where there's a combination of discipline and love. Okay? That's Judaism's view on the existence of the world. Not only how to be a good person, not only how to raise good children, but that the existence of the world is not possible unless we have a combination of discipline and love, of giving and boundaries. The other word for discipline is boundaries. If I want to give you water, I can pour gallons and gallons of water. But if you don't have a cup, you can't drink it. The cup is the boundaries through which I can absorb the love, the giving. Giving without a boundary is not receivable. So that's why we need the powerful God, and now we have the kind God. So now there's water to put in the cup. In this light, I'm on the bottom, the last line here. The very existence of the world is in and of itself a testimony to the fact that God is not just powerful but also kind. Now the word care connotes two distinct but equally important meanings. One meaning of the word care is attentiveness. To care about something means to pay it mind, to be concerned. It is the opposite of indifference. Another meaning of care is nurturing. To care for something means to look after it. Thus, the word care implies both attentiveness and nurturing. Later on, the author discusses that the nurturing of God comes from the female side of God. In other words, in Kabbalah, we talk about the fact that God is neither male nor female. Because if God were male, there would be only possibility of having males in the world. So that's itself the proof that God cannot be male. If God were to be female, there would be only females in the world. So God must have the attributes of male and female within its existence in order for us to have in this world males and females. And certain attributes of God that relate to the femininity of God express itself mostly in female human beings, and certain attributes of God that have to do with the maleness of God have to do with the attributes that express itself in male human subjects in this world. So we may say that the two cares over here, attentiveness and nurturing, are the father and mother, the male and female parts of God who care for us. Let's first speak about God's attentiveness. When we say that God pays attention, we're referring to His omniscience. Omniscience. I knew I was going to get stuck here. Does He that made the ear not hear? Does He that fashioned the eye not see? If God is aware of anything, then He is aware of everything. That's very important. That has to do because God is infinite.
What about compassion?
For the infinite, there is no such thing as having His attention divided or being preoccupied, overwhelmed, or distracted. It is axiomatic, that the God who knows His creation knows every detail therein with intimate knowledge. And this we're going to go on with philosophy over here. Hopefully the thread will be able to follow the thread over here. Okay? God is infinite. We're finite. God is beyond our human understanding. God is unchangeable. We are changeable. We change all the time. So what is the nature of the relationship of God's unchanging existence with His world's continuous changing behavior? If God is intimately involved with a changing world, then that might change Him. If the heater in the room goes up, then I am warmer. If the thermostat goes down, then I'm colder. So if I interact with a changing object, then that change affects me. So if God is unchangeable, He can't possibly be intimately involved with changing objects, because then that would change Him. This is a philosophical question that many have thought about, discussed within Judaism and outside of Judaism. The Kabbalah, and most specifically Hasidus, adopts an approach to this subject that says that God is intimately involved in every single detail of every single living creature in the world. As we'll see later, the Baal Shem Tov says that when a leaf falls off of a tree, then God paid attention. There was attentiveness of God to the fact that this specific leaf fell from this specific tree at this specific time and landed on a specific place. This is based on Maimonides, which was a philosopher that lived about 900 years ago. And Maimonides says, Maimonides got as far to consider this one of the most basic tenets of belief. God knows the actions of people and does not ignore them. It is not like those who say God has abandoned the earth. And this is, according to Maimonides, one of the 13 principles of faith. Those who are aware of the historical context of Maimonides' writing know that this declaration of God's omniscience was a direct refutation of the popular thinking of the time that held that God was unconcerned with the affairs of man. This view was of a lofty and aloof God was carried down from the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, whose ideas still very much dominate Western attitudes of today. They believe that God's eternal unchangingness necessitates that he be completely unconcerned by a temporal world that is continuously in a state of flux. Which basically is what I said earlier. In other words, if God is unchanging, then how can he have a conscious relationship with that which is always changing? The Jewish view, in contrast, dismisses this as a non-argument. God's being infinite and one does not exist apart from creation, rather creation exists within him. As such, God is knowing himself. In knowing himself, knows his creation. In the words of Maimonides, all existences besides the Creator, from the highest spiritual form to tiny gnat in the belly of the earth, exists by virtue of his reality. In knowing his own reality, he thus knows everything. In layman's terms, because in this case we're all laymen, God does not need to be detached from his creation in order to be timeless. When God takes note of what is going on in the world, it's not like a person who gets caught up in counting the cracks in the ceiling tiles and is mentally absorbed in something outside of himself. God pays attention to the world because the world exists within him. He knows himself thoroughly and thus knows every aspect of his world. Okay? God knows us because he knows himself. Period. There's no outside knowledge outside of God's existence. We exist within God's existence, and therefore God's knowledge of us is an intimate knowledge of himself, and therefore our behavior and our changing existence and continuous flux of situation has no impact whatsoever on God's infinity and unchangingness.
What about compassion?
This belief that God is always paying attention is crucial in recovery. We need to step aside from playing God in our own lives and place ourselves unreservedly in God's care. Program literature voices the sentiment in no uncertain term. On the last page where it summarizes the whole program, it summarizes step 3, and what does it say? Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. How could a person, particularly one who is so used to trying to control every aspect of life, possibly find peace by surrendering to a God who is indifferent or unknowing? Surrender yourself to the mailman. The God who keeps the recovering addict sober, sane, and alive must be a God who can be counted on to care. And this care is not relegated to only some aspects of life. If one were to believe that God has limited or selective knowledge of his creation, then one could only release to God those things that one believes are relevant or interesting to him. Oh, God doesn't really care about my behavior around the remote control. So then, I will be in charge of the remote control, and if anybody tries to take the remote control away from me, I will show them who is in charge. Because God can't possibly be interested of what's happening with the remote control. So if we believe that God has no interest, no care, no attentiveness to the remote control, we can't possibly abandon the control of the remote control to God. Because God is not available for that. He doesn't care. So a God who cares has to be a God who cares about everything. If not, I can't abandon myself. Abandoning myself means that I let go of all control in all areas of my life, in all my affairs. But the addict's recovery is based upon his or her freedom to turn everything over to the care of God, and to do so without reservation. Surrender that is conditional, incomplete, or later reneged is deemed taking back one's will. We know that. Well, I need to take some back because that's not working out for me. A sort of anti-third step, or third step in reverse, as it were, whereas the third step, taken properly, means a decision to trust that in all matters God does, without a doubt, care. That's care, meaning that He pays attention. There is no area of the playground that is not under God's loving watch. There is no corner that He can't see what's happening there. That brings us to the second meaning of the word care. As mentioned, caring also means nurturing. The idea of God as a caregiver is just as central to Judaism as any other conception of God, including that of creator or king. We love to talk about God as a king during the high holidays. Indeed, as noted above, a world without God's compassion and kindness could not exist. We need a mother. We need love, not just discipline. Furthermore, God's goodness is not just a necessary component of creation, but also the underlying and primary impetus. I love saying impetus. Impetus for its existence. As Kabbalah explains, why did God create the world? Everyone asks this question. If God is everything, and God is infinite, did He need to create the world? No, He didn't need to create the world. Because if He needed to create the world, it means that God wasn't complete, wasn't perfect. So He didn't need to create the world, but He still did it. Why? Why would He do such a crazy thing? So one of the answers is that God wanted to be in a relationship. Another answer that we're talking about here is God was good. And in order to express His goodness, He created a world to which upon He can grace His kindness. The reason for the creation of the world, God did not need it. He wanted it. And He wanted it for one and only reason. Because He wanted to bestow kindness upon humans. So now that the world is created, this is what God does all day. He bestows kindness upon the humans, upon His creations. Not only humans, all of His creation. As Kabbalah explains, God created the world in order to bestow kindness, goodness upon His creations, for it is nature of the good to do good. Teva hatov lehetiv in Hebrew. Good needs a place to express itself. I'm not going to use the word need because God doesn't need, but God wanted to express His goodness. In order to do that, He needed recipients, and we are the recipients. The world is the recipient. It is interesting that Judaism, particularly Kabbalah, use blatantly feminine terminology to describe God's role as nurturer with a capital N, evoking images of God as a loving mother. The name for God's immanent presence, Shekhinah, you guys heard about the Shekhinah, is unmistakably feminine. It is this name that is used in describing how the divine presence accompanies her children wherever they go. The word is called Shekhinta Begaluta. In Aramaic, the Shekhinah is in exile, which means that wherever the Jewish people go against their will, in oppression, in times of difficulty, both physically and even more so spiritually, they're never alone because they have a loving, nurturing mother who accompanies them. The Shekhinah. even into the darkness of exile, as in the Talmud statement, see how beloved are Israel before God, for in every place that they were sent away, the Shekhinah went with them. That first day of school, that terrifying moment, your mommy was holding your hand. And God is holding our hand during all our terrifying moments of life. When viewed in this light, the idea of giving oneself over to the care of God is one that evokes feeling of comfort, peace, and security. He doesn't have a long white beard with big furrows and he's looking to get you. It's your mother. It's your loving mother and your nurturing mother that you're giving your life over to. You trust her. She can protect you. She can nurture you. She will make sure that only goodness and kindness come your way. Feelings that are pleasant for all people, but essential for the person in recovery. It is said that addicts have little tolerance for discomfort, hence the intensely felt reflex to self-medicate that can be triggered by the slightest feeling of uneasiness or by none at all. The remarkable efficacy of spiritual consciousness as a means of recovery may in large be explained by the serenity that it offers, which the addict needs so direly. This serenity is contingent upon a belief in a caring, nurturing God who always does good. Because if not, then I can abandon myself to all these powerful people, but if I don't believe that they will be good to me, then I will live in fear. I will live in terror that someone who doesn't like me has control over stuff and I don't have any say in the matter. All right, let's try to finish this chapter. Now, that raises a question. If God is good, why do good things happen to bad people? No, why do bad things happen to good people? Basically, the answer that the author gives over here is, do bad things happen at all? Good people? You know bad people? No. Okay. So the real question is, do bad things really happen? This is the Hasidic answer to the question, and this is definitely the recovery answer to the question. Which means like this. I'm going to the second chapter, the second paragraph. Anyone who knows a good many people with quality long-term sobriety, this is a code word for working the steps with the sponsor, has certainly noticed a remarkable characteristic that all such people seem to have in common, an almost uncanny equanimity to life's ups and downs. Even more astounding is how opposite this is from the addict's nature, which, as we have mentioned, is abnormally irascible, moody and hypersensitive. It seems that the recovering addict no longer searches in vain for the answer to why do bad things happen question. Indeed, it seems that he or she has come to regard it as quite a non-question. The real question is, do bad things happen at all? This is not a word game. This is an expression of humility and faith. Can I really say that something is bad because I don't like it? Ooh. That's the bottom line. How do we define good and bad? I like it, good. I don't like it, bad. We started that when we came out of our mother's womb. When we liked it, we smiled, we giggled. When we didn't like it, we cried. And since then, we've always been defining good and bad on our human terms, which is, does it feel good or does it not feel good? Does it feel right or does it not feel right? When we become even a little more mature. Is it okay with me? Is that okay with me? Am I comfortable or uncomfortable? Is that really how we should define good and bad? Based on how we react to it? Or how much we like it? It's a human perception of good and bad, maybe. But is it really good or is it really bad? The Talmud says that one has to be thankful and grateful to God for the good things that happen to him, for the bad things that happen to him, on the equal footing that they have to be grateful for the negative things that happen to them. One student came to the Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbi Dovber, and he said to him, I can't understand what's going on over here. How could you do that? When something good happens, I win $1 million. Now that's a good thing. I am thankful, I'm grateful. When my house burns in a fire, how can I be the same exact thankful in the exact same terms? He said, that's a complicated question. In order to understand this, you need to go visit Zusha Nanipoli. Google him, he's a great guy. So Zusha lived in a little shack at the end of town. To make a long story short, he lived in poverty. He barely had a table to sit at. And his kids were sick. I mean, the whole thing. Anything that could go wrong, goes wrong. And this guy comes in, he says, the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Dovber, sent me to study about goodness and kindness. He said, I don't know. What are you talking about? He says, if you want to stay here, you can stay here for a few days. So he stays there for a few days and he sees how this guy lives his life. Physically in pain, everything, hungry, tired, uncomfortable, everything. So after a few days he leaves. He says, listen, I was sent by the Rebbe to find out how to be as grateful to God for the good things as the bad things. Could you tell me something about that? Because now I'm leaving. He says, this is very strange that the Rebbe would send you to me to find out about how to react positively to bad things. Nothing bad has ever happened to me. I don't know what you're talking about. That's the answer. That's the answer, because to him it was equal. What I like, what I don't like, became equally what God gave me. And as such, automatically was interpreted by his mind and eventually by his heart. And until his physical body also interpreted in a way, it's good. It's objectively good. Everything else you can read on your own. I'm just going to go on page 72. The Baal Shem Tov taught that nothing happens in this world by chance or by mistake. You know that famous page 417 or 449, depending on what decade you recovered. Rather, God carefully orchestrates every detail of His creation by means of, in Hebrew, hashgacha peratit. Literally individualized supervision, but more loosely translated as divine providence. Even when the wind carries a fallen leaf from one place to another, to the Baal Shem Tov, that too is hashgacha peratis. No details of creation is left to chance. There's no mistakes in God's world. Everything, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake, right? I once heard an alcoholic state emphatically that his HP was guiding every aspect of his life. I couldn't figure out how he knew about the concept of hashgacha peratit, HP, let alone the Hebrew term for it. Later it dawned on me that HP meant higher power. Even later it dawned on me that there really isn't any difference. Which is, our HP, our divine providence, is a caring, attentive father and a loving, nurturing mother that are constantly aware of our physical state of being, of our mental state of being, of our spiritual state of being, and shower us and bestow upon us only the best, good tools and events on our lives in order to live through all these moments in the best, objective, good way as possible. Everything else that we experience is our own confusion. Thank you.
Thank you.